A young billionaire drives under the influence and runs over a homeless boy. By donating blood to save his life, he is shocked to discover that the child is his own son. The city lights sparkled like diamonds scattered across dark velvet, their glow reflecting in the windows of the most exclusive skyscraper in town. On the 50th floor, Jack Hartley's birthday party was at its peak. Champagne flowed in golden streams, laughter rose above the electronic music, and the air was thick with the unmistakable scent of power and money. Jack, the birthday man of the hour, was the center of all that extravagance. At 30, he was the corporate world's prodigy, the enfant terrible who could turn failing businesses into profitable empires with a mere stroke of his golden pen. His tailored Italian suit fit his athletic figure perfectly, and his million-dollar smile lit up the room every time he raised his crystal glass. "To Jack Hartley," someone shouted from the crowd, "the man who makes the impossible look easy." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Jack, wearing a smile that blended arrogance with charm, raised his glass in response. "Thank you all for being here tonight," his voice echoed, smooth and confident. "You all know I don't believe in limits, the sky. That's just the beginning." The hours rushed by in a whirlwind of smiling faces, shallow conversations, and whispered business deals in dark corners. Jack navigated it all with the grace of a predator in its natural habitat, closing deals with a handshake here, making promises with a wink there. When the clock hit 3:15 a.m., Jack finally decided it was time to leave. He staggered slightly as he said goodbye to the last guests, but his smile never faltered. In the elevator, alone for the first time in hours, Jack glanced at himself in the mirror. His eyes were slightly red, but still bright with the night's adrenaline. "You're invincible, Jack," he muttered to his reflection. Down in the lobby, the valet hesitated at Jack's approach. "Mr. Hartley," the young man said, the keys to Jack's Aston Martin jingling nervously in his hands. Maybe I should call a driver for you, sir," Jack laughed, the sound echoing through the empty lobby. "Kid," he said, putting a heavy hand on the valet's shoulder, "I drive my own life. Do you really think I can't handle my own car?" With a swift motion, he snatched the keys and headed toward his gleaming vehicle. The engine purred to life, and Jack felt that familiar surge of power course through him. He was Jack Hartley. The world was his playground. The city streets were surprisingly empty. Jack floored the accelerator, letting the wind rush in through the open windows. The adrenaline mixed with the alcohol in his veins, forming a dangerous cocktail of euphoria and recklessness. Then it happened. A blur in front of him. A muffled scream. The horrifying sound of metal hitting flesh. Jack slammed on the brakes with all his might, the car skidding on the wet pavement. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest as he opened the door, legs shaky as they hit the asphalt. There, a few feet away, lay a small figure, a boy no older than 5 or 6, his big brown eyes fixed on Jack, filled with fear and pain. "Oh my God," Jack whispered, the reality of what had just happened hitting him like a punch to the gut. "Oh my God, no." He knelt beside the boy, hands trembling, unsure of what to do. A trickle of blood ran down the child's forehead, forming a dark pool on the asphalt. The boy didn't move, but his eyes. Those eyes remained locked on Jack, as though silently questioning him. With shaking fingers, Jack grabbed his phone. It took him 3 tries to dial the emergency number correctly. "Emergency, please," his voice cracked. I hit someone, a little boy. He's hurt. Please come quickly." The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Jack stayed beside the boy, muttering words of comfort, not knowing if the child could even hear him. Periodically, he looked around, expecting the boy's parents to appear at any moment. But the street remained deserted. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights danced across the buildings. Paramedics ran toward them, gently pushing Jack aside. "He's alive," one of them announced after a quick examination, "but in critical condition. We need to get him to the hospital right away." Jack watched, helpless, as they carefully placed the small body into the ambulance. A police officer approached him, asking questions Jack could barely process. Yes, he was driving. No, he didn't see the boy until it was too late. Yes, he had been drinking at the party. "Mr. Hartley," the officer said, his tone a mixture of respect and disapproval. "You understand that driving under the influence is a serious offense, right?" Jack nodded mechanically. At that moment, the legal consequences seemed trivial compared to the guilt weighing on him. Can I go to the hospital?" he asked. "I need to know if he's going to be okay." The officer hesitated, then finally agreed. "Don't leave town, Mr. Hartley. We'll be in touch for further questioning." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Jack could barely remember parking his car and rushing through the emergency entrance. The ER was in a state of controlled chaos, nurses and doctors hurrying back and forth. "The boy," Jack said to a nurse. "The boy who was hit by a car, how is he?" The nurse looked at him with a mixture of recognition and caution. "He's with the doctors now. Mr. Hartley, please wait in the waiting room." Jack sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, head in his hands. How had this happened? A child so small, alone on the street at that hour. Where were his parents? Time dragged on. Each minute felt like an eternity. Jack oscillated between overwhelming guilt and flashes of his previous life. The party, the success, the feeling of invincibility. All of it now seemed so distant, so meaningless. Finally, after what felt like forever, a doctor approached. "Mr. Hartley." The doctor had deep circles under his eyes and a serious expression. "The boy is stable, but in critical condition. He lost a lot of blood and urgently needs a transfusion." Jack jumped up. "Do whatever it takes," he said, reaching for his wallet. "I'll pay for everything, any treatment, the best specialists." The doctor raised a hand, stopping him. "Mr. Hartley, it's not a question of money. The boy's blood type is rare and our supply is critically low." Jack felt a surge of determination. "Test my blood," he said, rolling up his shirt sleeve. "Use mine, if it's compatible." The doctor looked at him with a mix of surprise and respect. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Hartley. This way, please." As Jack followed the doctor through the hospital corridors, he couldn't stop thinking about how drastically his life had changed in just a few hours, from celebrated billionaire to potential criminal, from invincible man to someone desperate to save a boy he didn't even know. The sound of hurried footsteps and raised voices caught his attention. A woman had apparently arrived, frantically asking about a boy who'd been hit by a car. Jack's chest tightened, knowing he would soon have to face not only the legal consequences of his actions, but also the pain and anger of the child's parents. Entering the room where his blood would be tested, Jack Hartley realized this night marked the end of an era in his life. Whatever came next, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. The night that changed everything was just beginning, and the secrets it would reveal were about to shake the very foundations of his world. The hospital corridor was enveloped in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the muffled hum of distant conversations. Jack Hartley paced back and forth, his hands trembling slightly as he waited for the blood compatibility test results. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps and a distressed voice echoed through the hallway. "Please, my son, he was run over. Where is he?" Jack froze. That voice, there was something horribly familiar about it. He turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. And there she was, Sarah. 5 years had passed, but Jack recognized her instantly. Her brown hair, once always neatly tied in a bun, now fell in disheveled waves around her pale face. Her eyes, once shy when they met his in the office corridors, were now wide with panic. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Sarah saw him, and her expression shifted from desperation to shock, then to a mixture of recognition and disbelief. "Jack," she whispered, barely audible. Before Jack could respond, a doctor approached Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Ramirez. Your son is stable, but where is he? Can I see him?" Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling. Dr. Ramirez hesitated, casting a quick glance at Jack. "He's in the ICU. He lost a lot of blood and needed an urgent transfusion. Fortunately, we found a compatible donor." Sarah's eyes shifted back to Jack, an unspoken question hanging in the air between them. Jack took a step forward, feeling as though he were moving in slow motion. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't know." The words felt inadequate, insufficient. How could he possibly express the whirlwind of emotions overwhelming him? Guilt for the accident, shock at seeing Sarah again, confusion about the entire situation. Sarah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "It was you. You ran over my son." The accusation in her voice cut Jack to the core. He nodded silently, unable to find words. Dr. Ramirez cleared his throat, reclaiming their attention. "Mr. Hartley, Mrs. Thompson, we need to discuss the test results." They followed the doctor into a small consultation room, the air heavy with unresolved tension. Jack felt as though he were walking to his own sentencing. Once inside, Dr. Ramirez sat behind a desk and motioned for Jack and Sarah to do the same. He opened a folder, his eyes scanning the papers before looking at them both. "The blood compatibility results are, well, unexpected," he began carefully. "Mr. Hartley, your blood isn't just compatible with the boys. The genetic markers indicate a very close familial relationship." Jack felt as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He looked at Sarah, who kept her eyes on the doctor, her face a mask of apprehension. "What exactly are you saying, doctor?" Jack asked, his voice rough. Dr. Ramirez took a deep breath. "I'm saying, Mr. Hartley, there is an extremely high probability that you are the boy's biological father." The ensuing silence was deafening. Jack felt as though he'd been hit by a train. A father, him of a boy he hadn't even known existed until a few hours ago. He turned to Sarah, who now buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. "Sarah," he said gently, reaching out a hesitant hand toward her. She lifted her head, her red eyes meeting his. "I tried to tell you," she whispered, "so many times, but you fired me. And then, when I finally managed to reach you, you said you wanted nothing to do with it." Memories flooded Jack's mind. The company party 5 years ago, Sarah, shy but radiant in a simple dress, the unexpected connection between them. And then, the panic when rumors started circulating, the impulsive decision to fire her to protect his reputation. "Oh, God," Jack murmured, the reality of what he'd done crashing into him with full force. "Sarah, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know." Dr. Ramirez cleared his throat again, reminding them of his presence. "There's more," he said gently. "The transfusion was successful, but the boy has fallen into a coma." Sarah let out a low moan as though she'd been physically struck. Jack felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "A coma," he repeated in disbelief. But the transfusion was supposed to help. "It helped stabilize him," Dr. Ramirez explained. "But the trauma from the accident was severe. The next 48 hours will be critical." Jack looked at Sarah, seeing the fear and despair in her eyes. In that moment, he knew his life would never be the same. All his accomplishments, all his success, suddenly seemed hollow in the face of this revelation. What's his name?" Jack asked softly. Sarah looked at him, a storm of emotions passing through her face. "Ethan," she replied. "His name is Ethan." Ethan, his son. A son he'd never known he had. A son now fighting for his life because of Jack's recklessness. "Can I see him?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ramirez nodded. "Briefly. Hayes in the ICU and needs absolute rest." As they walked down the hushed corridors of the hospital, Jack felt the weight of each step. His mind swirled with unspoken questions, regrets, and fears. Next to him, Sarah moved in silence, her tears now dried, but her pain still etched into every line of her face. When they finally entered the ICU and saw Ethan for the first time, hooked up to tubes and monitors, looking impossibly small and fragile in the hospital bed, Jack felt something inside him break and rebuild all at once. In that moment, gazing upon the son he'd never met, Jack Hartley made a silent promise. He would do everything in his power to fix the mistakes of the past, to be the father Ethan deserved, and to earn Sarah's forgiveness. The night that began with the celebration of his perfect life had turned into the most significant turning point of his existence. And as the steady beeping of the monitors echoed through the room, Jack knew that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The silence in the small ICU waiting area was broken only by the persistent ticking of the clock on the wall and Sarah's occasional deep sigh. Jack watched her out of the corner of his eye, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremble of her hands as she clutched an untouched cup of coffee. It had been 3 days since the accident, and Ethan remained in a coma. 3 days of endless vigil, of alternating hope and despair rolling in relentless waves. "Sarah," Jack finally broke the silence, his voice raspy from lack of use. I need to know, what happened after you left the company?" Sarah lifted her gaze, meeting Jack's eyes. For a moment, he saw a flash of anger there, quickly replaced by deep exhaustion. "What happened?" she repeated with a bitter laugh. "My life fell apart, Jack. That's what happened." She set the coffee cup down and straightened in her chair, as though preparing for battle. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified, but also hopeful. I thought that once I told you, you'd stand by me. What a fool I was." Jack felt each word like a knife to the chest. "Sarah, No," she cut him off, raising a hand. "You wanted to know, so let me speak." He nodded silently, bracing himself. "I tried to tell you several times, but you were always busy, always surrounded by important people. And then, suddenly, HR called me in. Fired me without explanation, with a generous severance package and a confidentiality agreement that barred me from talking about anything related to the company or its employees." Jack closed his eyes, remembering that day. He'd told HR to handle the situation when rumors about his involvement with Sarah started circulating. He never imagined the full consequences of his actions. "I was desperate," Sarah went on, her voice trembling slightly. "Pregnant, unemployed, and alone. My family. Well, they didn't approve of my situation. I had to get by on my own." She paused, her eyes drifting to the ICU door, as if she could see Ethan through it. The first few months were the hardest. Sleeping in shelters, taking odd jobs just to scrape by. There were days when I thought about giving up on everything. Jack felt a wave of nausea imagining Sarah, pregnant and vulnerable, on the harsh streets of a big city. "But then Ethan was born," Sarah continued, a small smile touching her lips for the first time, "and everything changed. He was so tiny, so perfect. I knew I had to fight for him, give him the life he deserved." Jack listened, feeling every word like a weight on his heart. How could he have been so blind, so selfish? "I got a job as a waitress. The pay was terrible, but the owner let me bring Ethan to work. We lived in a tiny apartment, but it was our home. Ethan grew up to be a sweet, smart boy. He always asked about you, you know." Jack's head snapped up. "He knew about me." Sarah nodded. "I never hid from him that he had a father. I showed him the only picture I had of you, cut out from a business magazine. He used to stare at it and make up stories about why you weren't with us. His favorites were that you were a secret spy or an astronaut on an important mission." Jack felt tears sting his eyes. His son, imagining him as a hero, when in reality, "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "It's not me you owe an apology to, Jack. It's Ethan. 5 years. 5 years of birthdays, Christmases, first steps, first words. You missed all of that." Silence fell heavily between them, broken only when the ICU door opened and Dr. Ramirez stepped in. Both stood immediately. "How is he, Doctor?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. The doctor sighed, running a hand over his graying hair. "Ethan's condition is still critical. We haven't seen significant improvements, but there's been no deterioration either. Right now, all we can do is wait and monitor." "But he will wake up, won't he?" Jack asked, desperation clear in his voice. "Mr. Hartley, Ms. Thompson, I need to be honest with you. Coma cases are unpredictable. Some patients wake in days, others in weeks or months, and some—" He didn't have to finish the sentence. The unspoken fear hung in the air like a dark cloud. Days dragged on, turning into a week. Jack and Sarah settled into a silent routine, taking turns sitting with Ethan, exchanging few words, united only by their shared worry for their son. On a particularly difficult night, when exhaustion and fear felt almost unbearable, Sarah began talking about Ethan, his first words, his first day at school, his passion for dinosaurs. "He has a huge collection of figurines," she said, a weary smile on her face. "He saved up for months to buy a T-Rex plush almost as big as he is." Jack listened intently, desperate for every detail, every glimpse of the life he'd missed. He pictured Ethan, healthy and happy, running around with his plush dinosaur, and the contrast with the motionless child in the hospital bed was almost too much to bear. "He's going to wake up, Sarah," Jack said, more to himself than to her. "He has to." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "And if he does wake up, Jack, then what?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. What would happen if Ethan woke up? How would they navigate this new territory, this unexpected family formed under the most tragic circumstances? Jack opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by the sudden blare of alarms from Ethan's room. Within seconds, the room was flooded with doctors and nurses, and Jack and Sarah were pushed outside, their panicked shouts muffled by the closed door. The next few minutes were the longest of their lives. Sarah gripped Jack's hand, her nails digging into his skin, but he hardly felt it. All his thoughts were on that closed door, praying, begging for his son, the son he barely knew but already loved desperately, to survive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Ramirez emerged. His face was grim, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that wasn't there before. "He's stable," the doctor announced, and Sarah let out a choking sob of relief. "Actually, we saw some promising signs of increased brain activity. It could indicate he's starting to come out of the coma." Jack felt his legs threaten to give way, and he leaned against the wall for support. "He's going to wake up?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too early to be certain," Dr. Ramirez cautioned, "but yes, we have reason to be cautiously optimistic." Sarah turned to Jack, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, he pulled her into an embrace, feeling her tremble against his chest. For a moment, all the hurt of the past, all the guilt and resentment was forgotten. They were just two parents, united by the hope of seeing their child open his eyes once again. When Sarah finally pulled away, there was a new resolve in her eyes. "Jack," she said softly, "I know we've made a lot of mistakes in the past, both of us, but Ethan deserves better than that. He deserves parents who can set aside their differences and do what's best for him." Jack nodded, a surge of gratitude for this woman who, despite everything he'd done, was willing to give him a chance. "You're right," he said. "I can't change the past, Sarah. I can't get back the years I lost. But I promise you, right here and now, I'll do everything I can to be the father Ethan deserves." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as though searching his eyes for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said simply. In that moment, as they turned to re-enter Ethan's room, Jack felt a subtle shift in the air. The tension that had permeated their interactions since the accident seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a quiet understanding. The road ahead would still be long and difficult. There was much to resolve, much to forgive. But for the first time since that fateful night, Jack felt a spark of hope, not just for Ethan's recovery, but for his own redemption, for a second chance to do things right. As he sat beside Ethan's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his small chest, Jack made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would be here, for Ethan, for Sarah, for the family he never knew he wanted until now. The night outside was dark, but inside that hospital room, a faint light of hope began to shine. The shrill sound of Jack's phone cut through the silence of the hospital room. He stirred uncomfortably in the chair where he'd dozed off, glancing quickly at Ethan, still motionless in bed, before answering. "Hello," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "Jack, darling, where are you?" Patricia Hartley's sharp, worried voice came from the other end. "You've been missing for days. Rumors are going around. The press is asking questions." "What on earth is happening?" Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready for it. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he began, hesitantly. "Oh God," Patricia sighed. "What have you done this time, Jack?" The annoyance in her voice was palpable, as if she were bracing for yet another scandal from her wayward son. Jack felt a stab of hurt, but pushed it away. Now wasn't the time for old resentments. "I had an accident," he said plainly. "I hit someone, a boy." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Mom," Jack prompted after a few seconds. "I'm coming there right now," Patricia declared, her voice now cold and controlled. "Which hospital?" Jack gave her the necessary information and hung up, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He glanced at Sarah, who'd just walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "My mother's on her way," he said simply. Sarah visibly paled. "Oh," was all she managed. An hour later, the sharp click of high heels echoed down the hospital corridor. Patricia Hartley swept into the room like a force of nature, her Chanel suit immaculate and her hair perfectly arranged, a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere of the hospital. Her eyes quickly scanned the scene. Jack, disheveled and unshaven, Sarah, clearly exhausted and dressed in simple clothes, and Ethan, small and fragile in the hospital bed. "Jack," she said, her voice controlled, "we need to talk, in private." Before Jack could respond, Sarah stood up. "I'll get more coffee," she murmured, slipping out of the room. As soon as the door closed, Patricia turned to Jack, her eyes flashing. "Explain yourself," she demanded. Jack took a deep breath and told her everything. The accident, finding out about Ethan, Sarah's story. As he spoke, he saw his mother's expression shift from disbelief to horror, and finally to a steely resolve. "This is a disaster, Jack," she said when he finished. "Do you have any idea what this will do to your reputation? To our family's reputation?" Jack felt anger rise in his chest. "That's what you're worried about. Our reputation. My son is in a coma. Mom?" Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "Son? You barely know this boy, and that woman, she probably just wants your money." "Don't be naive, Jack." "Don't speak about Sarah like that," Jack said, his voice dangerously low. "You know nothing about her or what she's been through." "Oh, please," Patricia scoffed. "She worked for us, Jack, a mere employee, and now she shows up with a child supposedly yours. This has scam written all over it." Jack rose abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "That's enough, Mother. Sarah isn't lying. Ethan is my son. The DNA tests confirmed it." Patricia visibly blanched. "You did a DNA test without consulting our lawyers? Jack, have you lost your mind?" "No, Mom," Jack replied, his voice firm. "For the first time in my life, I think I've actually found it." Patricia regarded him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. "You can't possibly be thinking of getting involved with this situation," she said, vaguely gesturing toward Ethan's bed. "That situation is my son," Jack replied, his voice trembling with pent-up emotion. "And yes, I plan to get involved." "Completely." "Jack, be reasonable," Patricia pleaded, switching tactics. "Think about the future of the company, your future. If this gets out—" "I don't care," Jack cut her off. "Mom, don't you understand? None of that matters now. Only Ethan matters." Patricia stayed silent for a moment, her eyes flitting between Jack and the child on the bed. When she spoke again, her voice was as cold as ice. "If you insist on this madness, Jack, you leave me no choice. You'll be disinherited. You'll lose everything. Your position in the company, your trust fund, all of it." Jack felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. For a brief moment, fear paralyzed him. His entire life, his identity, had been tied to his family's wealth and status. Losing it all was terrifying, but then his gaze fell on Ethan, and a strange calm washed over him. "If that's how it has to be," he said quietly, "so be it." Patricia stared at him, stunned. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Jack replied. At that moment, the door opened and Sarah walked in, stopping abruptly at the tension in the air. Patricia shot Sarah an icy look before turning back to Jack. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Jack. You have 24 hours to reconsider or face the consequences." With that, she spun on her heels and left the room, leaving a heavy silence behind. Sarah looked at Jack, worry in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Jack let out a humorless laugh. "No, I'm not, but I will be." He moved closer to Ethan's bed, gently touching the boy's hand. "I choose you," he said softly, more to himself than to Sarah. "I choose this family." Sarah placed a hesitant hand on Jack's shoulder. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "Ethan and I have gotten by just fine until now. We don't want to ruin your life." Jack turned to her, his eyes shining with a determination Sarah had never seen before. "You're not ruining my life, Sarah. You're saving it." As the sun began to set outside the hospital window, casting a golden glow across the room, Jack felt, for the first time in his life, that he was doing the right thing. The road ahead would be hard, full of obstacles and uncertainties, but looking at Ethan and Sarah, he knew it would be worth it. The family he never knew he wanted until now was right there, and he would fight with everything he had to keep them together. Jack's office at Hartley Enterprises felt strangely foreign, as though it belonged to another life. He ran his fingers over the polished surface of his desk, remembering how many important decisions had been made there. Now, he was about to uncover a secret that could shake the foundation of everything he knew. With a deep sigh, Jack powered on his computer. It was time to investigate the circumstances surrounding Sarah's dismissal 5 years ago. He knew it would be painful, but he had to understand what really happened. Digging through the company archives, Jack found the employee records from 5 years back. Sarah Thompson's name leaped out at him, along with the date of her termination. Curiously, the reason listed was simply mutual contract termination. Mutual, Jack muttered to himself. That doesn't make sense. He kept digging, sifting through old emails and internal memos, hoping to shed some light on the truth. Then he found something troubling, an email from his mother, Patricia, to the head of the Human Resources Department, dated a few days before Sarah's termination. "We need to get rid of the problem. Use discretion. Make it appear mutual. Offer whatever is needed for her silence." Jack felt his stomach churn. The problem could only be Sarah, and possibly the pregnancy she was trying to tell him about. His own mother had orchestrated Sarah's dismissal, effectively cutting off any chance for Jack to know about his child. As he continued his search, Jack found more evidence of his family's involvement. Records of a generous settlement paid to Sarah, far above the company's standard for employees at her level. And more disturbingly, a strict confidentiality agreement that prevented her from discussing any aspect of her employment or relationship with the Hartley family. "My God," Jack whispered, feeling nauseous. They silenced her completely. Unable to stay in the office any longer, Jack decided to return to the hospital. He needed to talk to Sarah, to hear her side of the story. Arriving at Ethan's room, Jack found Sarah seated beside the bed, softly reading a children's story to the still unconscious boy. The scene hit him hard, reminding him of everything he'd missed these last 5 years. "Sarah," he called gently, not wanting to startle her. She lifted her eyes from the book, a small, tired smile on her lips. "Hi, Jack. Any news?" Jack hesitated, unsure how to approach the subject. "Actually, yes. Sarah, so I looked into what happened when you were fired." The smile vanished from Sarah's face, replaced by apprehension. "Oh," she said simply, closing the book. Jack sat down in the chair beside her. "I need to know, Sarah, what really happened. Please tell me everything." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Ethan. Finally, she began to speak, her voice low and heavy with emotion. "I found out I was pregnant about a month after that night, the night of the company party," she began. "At first, I was panicked, but then I was hopeful. I thought that once you knew, maybe we could be a family." Jack felt a pang of guilt, recalling how cold and distant he'd been in the weeks following that night. "I tried to tell you," Sarah continued, "several times, but you were always busy, always surrounded by people. And then one day HR called me in." She paused, taking a deep breath before going on. "They told me my contract was being terminated. They offered me a generous settlement, more than I could have ever dreamed of. But there was a catch. I had to sign a confidentiality agreement." What did the agreement say? Jack asked, though he already suspected the answer. That I couldn't talk about anything related to my job at Hartley Enterprises, especially about you or your family. Sarah looked Jack directly in the eyes. Jack, they knew I was pregnant. Somehow, they found out. Jack felt a surge of anger rising in his chest. It was my mother, he said, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. I found emails. She orchestrated the whole thing. Sarah didn't seem surprised. I always suspected, she said softly. The day I signed the papers, I saw your mother in the HR office. She looked at me. Jack, the way she looked at me. Like I was something dirty, something to be disposed of. Jack shut his eyes in shame and fury. Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, Sarah replied, her voice gentle. But Jack, why did you never respond to my messages? I tried contacting you even after I was fired. Jack frowned, confused. Messages? Sarah, I never got any messages from you. Now it was Sarah's turn to look puzzled. But I sent so many. Emails, texts. I even went to your house once, kid, but the security guard threw me out. A dark suspicion formed in Jack's mind. Sarah, I think my mother may have intercepted your attempts to reach me. She's always had a lot of control over my life. Sarah nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces finally falling into place. That explains a lot. Jack stood abruptly, pacing the small room. I can't believe she would do that. Hiding my own child from me. Jack, Sarah said softly, interrupting his swirling thoughts. What are you going to do now? He paused, looking at Ethan in the hospital bed, then at Sarah. In that moment, Jack felt a clarity he'd never experienced before. I'm going to confront my mother, he said firmly. I'm going to find out the whole truth. And then, Sarah, I'm going to do what I should have done 5 years ago. I'm going to be here for you and for Ethan. Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if evaluating his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said simply. As Jack prepared to leave, to face his mother and the secrets of the past, he felt a mix of fear and determination. The road ahead would be difficult, but looking at Ethan and Sarah, he knew it would be worth it. It was time to bury the secrets of the past and build a new future, one where he would be the father Ethan deserved and the man Sarah had once believed he could be. Jack felt the weight of each step as he climbed the stairs of the Hartley mansion. The house that had once been his refuge now seemed like a threatening fortress, guarding secrets he was afraid to uncover. Taking a deep breath, he rang the doorbell. The door opened, revealing Patricia Hartley, impeccably dressed as always. Her welcoming smile faltered at the grim look on Jack's face. Jack, darling, what's wrong? She asked, concern in her voice sounding false to his ears. We need to talk, Mom, Jack said, his voice firm. Now. Patricia hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. She led him to the office, closing the door behind them. What is this about, Jack? She asked, settling into the leather chair behind the imposing desk. Jack remained standing, unable to contain the nervous energy coursing through him. It's about Sarah Thompson, he said, watching his mother's reaction closely. Patricia's face hardened almost imperceptibly. Sarah Thompson, the employee who was let go a few years ago, what about her? Don't play innocent, Mom, Jack retorted, anger lacing his tone. I know what you did. I've seen the emails, the documents. You orchestrated her dismissal, didn't you? Patricia stayed silent for a long moment, her eyes studying Jack carefully. Finally, she let out a weary sigh. Sit down, Jack, she said, gesturing to the chair in front of her. This is going to be a long conversation. Jack hesitated, then obeyed, feeling as though he was about to hear something that would change his life forever. Yes, I arranged Sarah's dismissal, Patricia began, her voice calm and controlled. But you have to understand, Jack, I did it to protect you, to protect our family. Protect me, Jack exploded in disbelief. How does hiding my own child from me protect me? Patricia paled visibly. So you know about the child? Yes, Mom, I know about Ethan, my son, the son you kept me from knowing for 5 years. Patricia's composed mask finally began to crack, She sank into her chair, suddenly looking old and tired. Jack, you have to understand. When I found out that girl was pregnant, I panicked. You were just starting your career. You had a brilliant future ahead. A scandal like this could have ruined everything. Jack felt a wave of nausea at his mother's words. So, you decided to just get rid of her like she was trash. I did what I thought was necessary, Patricia responded, her voice hardening. I offered her a generous settlement, more than she'd ever earn in years of work. In return, she agreed to stay quiet and leave town. Jack closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's words about trying to reach him. But she didn't leave, did she? She tried to tell me. Patricia looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. Yes, she did. But I intercepted her messages, her emails. I instructed security not to let her contact you. The revelation hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. He stood abruptly, unable to stay seated. How could you? He shouted, years of pent-up rage finally surfacing. She was pregnant, alone, scared. And you treated her like a threat that needed to be eliminated. I did what any mother would do to protect her child, Patricia retorted, standing as well. No, Mom, Jack said, his voice trembling with emotion. You did what a selfish, controlling woman would do to maintain her power. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself, your precious reputation. Patricia seemed to wither under Jack's words. She sank back into her chair, looking suddenly old and weary. Maybe you're right, she admitted quietly. Maybe I went too far. But Jack, you have to believe me. I thought I was doing what was best for you. Jack shook his head, unable to accept her justification. The best thing for me would have been to let me take responsibility for my actions, to let me be a father to my son. A heavy silence settled over the office. Jack stared at his mother, the woman he had always admired and respected, now seeming like a stranger to him. What happens now? Patricia finally asked, in her voice small and uncertain. Now, Jack said, squaring his shoulders, I'm going back to the hospital. I'm staying with my son and his mother, and I'm going to fix the mess you caused. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. And Mom, don't try to interfere again. They're my family now, and I'll protect them. Even from you. With those words, Jack left, leaving Patricia alone with the weight of her actions. When Jack returned to the hospital, he found Sarah asleep in the chair beside Ethan's bed. He watched her for a moment, struck by her strength and resilience in the face of everything she'd endured. Sarah, he said softly, touching her shoulder. She woke with a start, her eyes automatically searching for Ethan before settling on Jack. You're back, she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. Jack nodded, pulling a chair closer. Yeah, I'm back. I talked to my mother. Sarah straightened, now fully awake. And Jack took a deep breath before telling Sarah everything he'd discovered. As he spoke, he watched a series of emotions cross her face. Shock, anger, sadness, and finally, a sort of weary resignation. I always knew your mother was behind it, Sarah said when he finished, but hearing it confirmed, it's different. Sarah, I'm so sorry, Jack said, taking her hands in his. I'm sorry for everything you went through, for everything my family did to you. Sarah squeezed his hands gently. It wasn't your fault, Jack. You were a victim too. They fell silent for a moment, both gazing at Ethan, still motionless in the hospital bed. What do we do now? Sarah finally asked. Jack let out a tired sigh. Now we wait. We wait for Ethan to wake up. And when he does, we tell him the truth. The whole truth. Sarah nodded slowly. He'll have a lot of questions. And we'll answer every one of them, Jack promised. Together. Just then, as if he'd heard their words, Ethan stirred in bed. It was a faint movement, but enough to make Jack and Sarah hold their breath. Ethan, Sarah called softly, leaning over the bed. The boy's eyes fluttered open, blinking repeatedly as he looked around, confused and disoriented. Mom, he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. Sarah let out a sob of relief, tears streaming down her face. Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. Jack watched the scene, feeling both overwhelmed and out of place. This was a moment between mother and son, a bond he did not yet share with Ethan. Ethan's gaze wandered around the room, finally landing on Jack. There was a moment of confusion before a flicker of recognition lit his eyes. "You," Ethan began, his voice frail. "You're the man from the picture." Jack's heart pounded. Sarah had mentioned that she'd shown Ethan a photo of him cut from a magazine. "Yes, Ethan," Jack said softly, stepping closer to the bed. "My name is Jack, and I'm your father." Ethan's eyes widened at the revelation, and he looked to Sarah for confirmation. She nodded gently. "It's true, sweetheart," she said. "Jack is your father." Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Finally, he looked back at Jack. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice small and vulnerable. Jack felt tears burn at his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry I wasn't here, but I promise you, from now on, I'll always be by your side." "If you'll let me," Ethan seemed to consider this for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay," he said softly. At that moment, the door burst open, revealing Patricia Hartley, followed closely by Jack's father and two suited men who appeared to be lawyers. "What's going on here?" Jack's father thundered, his gaze sweeping over the scene before him. Jack stood, placing himself protectively between his newly found family and the intruders. "Dad, Mum, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. "We've come to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life," Patricia declared, stepping forward. Jack felt anger rise within him once more. "The only mistake I made was trusting you all these years. Now please leave. This is a private moment for my family." "Family?" his father sneered. "Jack, be reasonable. You barely know this boy." "He's my son," Jack said firmly, "and Sarah is his mother. They are my family now, whether you like it or not." Patricia took another step forward, her voice pleading. "Jack, please think about what you're doing. Think about the company, about your future." "I am thinking about my future," Jack replied. "A future with my son and the woman I should have supported 5 years ago." The tense silence that followed was palpable. Finally, Jack's father spoke, his voice as hard as steel. "If you go down this path, Jack, there's no turning back. You'll lose everything. Your inheritance, your position in the company, everything." Jack looked at Sarah and Ethan, who watched the confrontation with a mixture of fear and confusion. At that moment, his decision crystallized. "If that's the price for having my real family," he said, "then so be it." Patricia let out a shaky sigh. "Jack, please." "Enough," Jack interrupted. "You made your choice 5 years ago when you decided to hide my son from me. Now I'm making mine. Please, leave." Reluctantly, his family and the lawyers left the room, leaving Jack, Sarah, and Ethan alone once more. Jack turned to them, feeling drained but oddly free. "I'm sorry about that," he said softly. Sarah rested a hand gently on his arm. "Are you okay?" Jack nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I'm better than ever." He moved to the side of Ethan's bed, sitting carefully on the edge. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "How would you feel about us starting over as a family?" Ethan looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly, before turning his eyes back to Jack. Slowly, a small smile appeared on his face. "Okay," he said. "I'd like that." In that moment, as Jack felt the gentle squeeze of Ethan's hand in his and saw the hopeful smile on Sarah's face, he knew he'd made the right choice. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and unknowns, but for the first time in his life, Jack was ready to face them. Because now, he finally had something worth fighting for, his family. The hospital room was cloaked in an almost tangible silence, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Sarah, as she had done for the past few days, held Ethan's hand, her tired eyes fixed on her son's unmoving face. Jack, seated on the other side of the bed, alternated between watching Ethan and casting worried glances at Sarah. Then it happened. A movement so subtle that, for a moment, Jack thought he'd imagined it. Ethan's fingers twitched lightly in Sarah's hand. "Sarah," Jack whispered, leaning forward. "Did you see that?" Sarah, who had started to doze off, snapped awake. What happened?" Before Jack could answer, Ethan's eyes began flickering beneath his closed lids. A small groan escaped his lips. "Ethan," Sarah called, her voice trembling with emotion. "Ethan, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Jack jumped up, dashing to the door. "I'll get the doctors." Within minutes, the once quiet room was bustling with activity. Doctors and nurses moved quickly around the bed, checking monitors, adjusting equipment, firing rapid questions at each other. Sarah was gently moved aside, but she refused to let go of Ethan's hand. Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders, offering silent support as they both watched anxiously. "Ethan," Dr. Ramirez's firm, calm voice broke through the commotion. "Ethan, if you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." The tension in the room was palpable. Then, slowly, Ethan's fingers curled around the doctor's hand. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Sarah let out a muffled sob, and Jack felt tears welling in his own eyes. "Good jobs, Ethan," Dr. Ramirez encouraged. "Now, can you try opening your eyes for us?" The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. Then, finally, Ethan's eyelids fluttered open. The world seemed to pause for a moment. Ethan's eyes, unfocused and confused, roamed the room without settling on anything or anyone in particular. "Ethan?" Sarah asked softly, leaning over the bed. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Ethan blinked several times, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. He looked at Sarah, but there was no recognition in his eyes. Where am I?" he murmured, his voice weak and raspy. Dr. Ramirez stepped closer, speaking in a calm, reassuring tone. "You're in the hospital, Ethan. You were in an accident and have been asleep for a while, but you're awake now. You're safe." Ethan furrowed his brow, clearly struggling to process the information. His eyes continued wandering around the room, passing over Sarah and Jack without any sign of familiarity. I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "Who are you people?" Sarah felt her heart clench painfully. "Ethan, I'm your mom. Don't you recognize me?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and a hint of panic. "Mom? I don't remember. I don't know who you are." Sarah choked back a sob, turning helplessly to Dr. Ramirez. Jack placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Doctor." Ramirez leaned in closer to Ethan, his voice gentle but firm. "Ethan, feeling confused is normal right now. You've been through a lot. We're going to run some tests to see how you're doing, okay?" Ethan nodded hesitantly, still looking frightened and disoriented. Over the next few minutes, Dr. Ramirez asked Ethan a series of simple questions, checking his memory and cognitive function. It became clear that Ethan had no recollection of his life prior to the accident, not even his own name or his mother's. "It's a severe form of post-traumatic amnesia," Dr. Ramirez explained to Jack and Sarah once they'd finished the initial tests. "Given the trauma Ethan experienced, it's not uncommon for him to have temporarily lost his memories." Sarah, tears silently streaming down her face, clutched Jack's hand for support. "How long could this last, Doctor? Will he remember us?" Dr. Ramirez sighed softly. "Every case is unique, Mrs. Thompson. Memories can return gradually over days, weeks, or even months. In some cases, it can take longer. The most important thing is to give Ethan time to recover and avoid pressuring him." Jack, who had remained silent for most of this, finally spoke. "What can we do to help him?" "The best thing you can do is be present and patient," Dr. Ramirez said. "Talk to him. Tell him about his life, but don't force him to remember. Let the memories come back on their own." When the medical staff finally left them alone, Sarah turned to Ethan with a trembling smile. "Ethan, sweetheart," she began softly, "I know you're feeling confused and scared right now, but we're here for you. I'm your mom, Sarah, and this is Jack. He's a very close friend of our family." Ethan looked at them, his eyes uncertain. I'm sorry. I don't remember you." "That's all right, Ethan," Jack said, stepping forward. "There's nothing to apologize for. We know this is hard for you." Sarah nodded, fighting to keep her composure. "We'll help you remember, sweetheart. And even if it takes time, we'll be here for you every step of the way." Ethan glanced from Sarah to Jack, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in his eyes. Can you tell me about myself? About who I am?" Sarah and Jack exchanged a quick look before Sarah began. Well, your full name is Ethan Michael Thompson. You're 5 years old and you love dinosaurs. Your favorite is the T-Rex, and you have a huge collection of dinosaur figurines at home. As Sarah spoke, Ethan's expression wavered between confusion and fascination. He listened intently, as though learning about a stranger rather than himself. Jack, sensing he should contribute, added, And you're incredibly smart, Ethan. Your mom told me you're already reading books meant for older kids. Ethan looked at Jack, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Have you known me for a long time? Jack hesitated, exchanging another quick glance with Sarah before replying carefully. Actually, Ethan, we only met recently, but your mom told me a lot about you, and I'm eager to get to know you better. Ethan nodded slowly, still appearing confused but slightly less frightened. I wish I could remember, he said softly. Everything feels strange. Sarah gently stroked Ethan's hair. It'll take time, honey. But don't worry, we're here to help you through it all. The following hours were filled with more medical tests and gentle conversations. Sarah and Jack took turns sharing stories of Ethan's life, hoping to spark any dormant memories. Although Ethan remained unable to recall anything concrete, he seemed calmer with their presence. As evening fell, Ethan began to show signs of fatigue. Dr. Ramirez returned for one last check, suggesting everyone get some rest. Tomorrow's another day, he said kindly. Ethan's brain needs time to heal. Rest is crucial right now. While Sarah settled into the chair beside Ethan's bed, determined not to leave his side, Jack prepared to head out. I'll be back in the morning, he promised, looking at Ethan and then at Sarah. If you need anything during the night, just call me. Sarah nodded gratefully. Thank you, Jack, for everything. Before leaving, Jack approached Ethan's bed one last time. Good night, Ethan, he said softly. I'm so glad you're awake. We'll talk more tomorrow, okay? Ethan looked at him, a small, hesitant smile on his lips. Okay. Jack. As Jack left the hospital room that night, he felt a whirlwind of emotions. The joy of seeing Ethan awake was tempered by the pain of not being recognized, of not being able to reveal who he really was. But he knew that, for now, it was what Ethan needed. The future was uncertain, but Jack felt determined. No matter how long it took or how hard it would be, he would be there for Ethan and Sarah. They would face this new phase together, as a family, even if Ethan didn't yet realize it. One day at a time, one memory at a time, they would rebuild their lives. And Jack hoped that, when the time was right, Ethan would be ready to accept not only his lost memories, but also the truth about his father. The days following Ethan's awakening were a roller coaster of emotions for everyone involved. The small hospital room became the center of the universe for Sarah and Jack, both determined to help Ethan heal. Each morning brought a new hope that Ethan might recover some small piece of his memory. Sarah stayed constantly by the bed, an anchor for the confused boy. Mom? Ethan called one morning, his voice still weak but clearer than in previous days. Sarah leaned over the bed immediately, a warm smile on her weary face. Yes, sweetheart, I'm right here. Ethan frowned, his eyes roaming the now familiar room. I dreamed about dinosaurs. They seemed so real. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Ethan had mentioned anything related to a past memory. That's wonderful, Ethan. You've always loved dinosaurs. Maybe it's a memory coming back. Ethan nodded slowly, still looking uncertain. Maybe. I wish I could remember more. Sarah gently brushed his hair. It'll take time, my love, but we're here to help you every step of the way. At that moment, Jack entered the room holding a small package. He had become a constant presence, arriving early each morning and staying late into the night. Good morning, you two, he greeted with a warm smile. How are we today? Ethan looked at Jack with a mix of curiosity and caution. Though he still didn't remember him, the boy seemed to be getting used to his presence. Ethan dreamed about dinosaurs, Sarah informed him, a note of hope in her voice. Jack's face lit up. That's great. Hey, Ethan, I brought you something. He stepped closer and handed Ethan the package. The boy opened it carefully, revealing a small T-Rex model. Wow, Ethan whispered. his eyes wide with admiration. "It's awesome," Jack smiled, clearly pleased with Ethan's reaction. "Your mum told me you love dinosaurs. I thought this might help bring back some memories." Ethan studied the toy for a moment before looking at Jack. "Thanks, Jack. That's really nice of you." Sarah watched the interaction with mixed feelings of joy and apprehension. It was wonderful to see Ethan warming up to Jack, even without remembering who he truly was. But she couldn't help the twinge of worry in her heart. What if Ethan got too attached and Jack decided to leave again? Over the next few days, Ethan continued making small strides. He started asking more questions about his life before the accident, about his home, his school, and his friends. Sarah and Jack answered patiently, always hoping one of their stories would trigger a long-lost memory. A week after Ethan regained consciousness, Dr. Ramirez entered the room for a detailed evaluation. "Well, Ethan," the doctor said with an encouraging smile, "I'm very happy with your progress. Your tests show significant improvement in brain activity." Sarah squeezed Jack's hand, a gesture that had become common between them these past days. "Does that mean his memories might come back soon, Doctor?" Dr. Ramirez nodded cautiously. "It's possible. But remember that memory recovery is a gradual process. Ethan may recover some memories quickly, while others might take longer or never return fully." Ethan, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Dr. Ramirez, why can't I remember the accident? Everyone talks about it, but it's like there's a hole in my head." The doctor sat on the edge of the bed, his expression serious but kind. "Ethan, sometimes when we experience something very scary or traumatic, our brain tries to protect us by hiding those memories. It's possible you may never fully recall the accident, and that's okay." Ethan nodded slowly, taking in the explanation. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to Jack. "Jack, were you there? At the accident?" The question caught Jack off guard. He shot a quick glance at Sarah before answering carefully. "Yes, Ethan, I was there." "Did you know me before that?" Ethan pressed, his eyes brimming with curiosity. Jack hesitated, feeling Sarah's gaze on him. He knew they were approaching a pivotal moment. "Actually, Ethan," Sarah interjected gently, "there's something important we need to tell you about, Jack." Ethan looked at his mother, confusion and anticipation swirling in his expression. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, exchanging a meaningful glance with Jack before continuing. "Sweetheart, Jack isn't just a friend of the family. He's your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at Sarah, then at Jack, his eyes wide in shock. "My dad?" he finally managed to say, voice barely above a whisper. Jack took a hesitant step toward the bed. "Yes, Ethan, I'm your father. I know it's a huge surprise." "No!" Ethan suddenly shouted, startling everyone. "No, you're not my dad. I don't even know you." Sarah immediately moved to calm Ethan, who was trembling, tears threatening to spill down his cheeks. "Ethan, honey, I know this is a lot to take in." "Why wasn't he here before?" Ethan asked, his voice choked. "If he's my dad, why haven't I seen him before the accident?" Jack's heart broke at the pain in Ethan's voice. He desperately wanted to explain, to make it right, but he knew he needed to give Ethan some space. Sarah shot Jack an apologetic look before turning back to Ethan. "It's complicated, sweetheart. There were circumstances that kept Jack away, but he's here now, and he really wants to be part of your life." Ethan shook his head emphatically. "No, I don't want that. I want him to go away." Jack felt as though he'd taken a punch to the gut. He stepped back, fighting tears. I understand, Ethan. I'll give you the space you need." Sarah stood, torn between comforting Ethan and reassuring Jack. "Jack, maybe it's best if—" "I'll go," Jack said quickly. "Ethan needs time. I get it." With one last pained look at his son, Jack left the room, leaving Sarah to handle the emotional storm they had unleashed. In the days that followed, Ethan swung between anger, confusion, and buried curiosity. He refused to talk about Jack, but Sarah often caught him glancing at the door, as though expecting him to walk in at any moment. Jack, respecting Ethan's wishes, kept his distance, but he called Sarah daily for updates on the boy's progress. Every call was a mix of hope and heartbreak for him. A week after the revelation, Ethan finally broke his silence on the matter. "Mom," he said one evening, as Sarah was fluffing his pillows, "why wasn't Jack with us before?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, bracing herself for a difficult conversation. "It's a complicated story, sweetheart. Jack and I knew each other a long time ago before you were born, but there were misunderstandings. Jack didn't know about you until recently." Ethan frowned. "He didn't know I existed." "No," Sarah confirmed gently. "And when he finally found out, he was so sad about all the time he'd lost." "But why is he here now?" Ethan pressed. Sarah gave a sad smile. "Because he wants to know you, Ethan. He wants to be part of your life. The accident, well, it was terrible, but it also gave us a chance to be a family." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his thoughts and emotions. "I'm not sure if I want a dad," he finally said, his voice small and unsure. Sarah gently touched his cheek. "I know it's scary, sweetheart, but how about we give Jack a chance? You don't have to call him Dad yet. We can take it slow and see how things go." Ethan considered this for a moment and finally nodded hesitantly. "Okay, I guess we can try." The next day, when Jack arrived at the hospital, he was greeted by a sight that filled him with hope. Ethan was sitting up in bed, holding the T-Rex toy Jack had given him. "Hi, Jack," Ethan said timidly when he walked in. Jack felt a lump in his throat. "Hey, Ethan, can I come in?" Ethan nodded, and Jack slowly approached the bed. Sarah stood by, watching the interaction intently, ready to step in if needed. "I was thinking," Ethan began haltingly, "maybe you could tell me more about dinosaurs. Mum said you know a lot about them." Jack felt a smile spread across his face. "Sure, I'd love to. Actually, I know of an amazing museum with real dinosaur skeletons. Maybe once you're better, we can visit it together." Ethan thought for a moment and then smiled a little. "That would be cool." As Jack started explaining different dinosaur species, with Ethan listening attentively and occasionally asking questions, Sarah watched with tears in her eyes. It was a small step, but a crucial one. The road ahead would still be long and challenging. Ethan still had a lot of physical and emotional healing to do. Jack would have to navigate his new role as a father, and Sarah would have to manage her own emotions while supporting both Ethan and Jack. But in that moment, seeing father and son beginning to form a bond, Sarah felt a wave of hope. Maybe, despite all the obstacles, they could truly become the family they were always meant to be. As the conversation between Jack and Ethan flowed more naturally, becoming livelier and more relaxed, Sarah realized these were truly the first steps toward a future that, only a few weeks ago, had seemed impossible. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, but with patience, love, and understanding, they would face each hurdle together. And maybe, in time, Ethan's lost memories would return, not just the old ones, but new ones formed with his newly united family. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow through the hospital window. Sarah allowed herself a moment of pure gratitude. Despite all the hardships, the fear and the uncertainty, they were here, together. And that, she realized, was what mattered most. The days in the hospital began to follow a familiar routine. Every morning at exactly 9 a.m., Jack arrived with a cup of coffee for Sarah and a new book or toy for Ethan. At first, his visits were brief and cautious, always attentive to any sign of discomfort from Ethan. "Good morning, you two," Jack greeted cheerfully one sunny morning, walking into the room with his usual warm smile. Sarah, who was helping Ethan with his breakfast, returned his smile. "Good morning, Jack. Look who's up and about today." Ethan, sitting on the edge of the bed with his legs dangling, looked shyly at Jack. "Hi," he murmured. Jack's heart pounded. It was his first time seeing Ethan out of bed since the accident. "Wow, look at you. I bet you're feeling a lot better, huh?" Ethan nodded, a small smile appearing on his lips. "The doctor said I can try walking around a bit today." "That's amazing, champ," Jack exclaimed, resisting the urge to rush forward and hug the boy. Instead, he moved closer carefully and took a seat in the chair beside the bed. "Hey, I brought you something." He pulled a small package from his bag and handed it to Ethan, who opened it carefully. Inside was a colorful illustrated book about dinosaur explorers. "Wow," Ethan whispered, his eyes shining with excitement. "Thank you, Jack." Sarah watched them with both joy and a touch of anxiety. It was wonderful to see Ethan opening up to Jack, but she couldn't suppress the slight worry in her heart. What if Ethan grew too attached, and Jack decided to leave once again? Sensing her unease, Jack looked at Sarah with a reassuring smile. "I thought maybe we could read it together later, if you're up for it, Ethan. Maybe after your walk?" Ethan looked at his mother, seeking permission. Sarah forced a smile. "Sure, that sounds great. But first, let's focus on getting you on your feet, okay?" With the help of a nurse, Ethan took his first tentative steps around the room. Jack and Sarah stood by, both fighting back tears of pride. When Ethan wobbled slightly, Jack instinctively moved to help, but held himself back, letting Sarah take the lead. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Sarah encouraged, gently supporting Ethan's arm. Ethan smiled, proud of himself, out of V. "Do you think I can go home soon, Mom?" Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Jack before answering. "I hope so, my love. Let's see what the doctor says, okay?" Later that day, as promised, Jack sat beside Ethan's bed with the Dinosaur Explorer book. Sarah observed them from across the room, pretending to read a magazine but truly absorbing every detail of their interaction. "And that's how they discovered the first complete T-Rex fossil," Jack concluded, closing the book. Ethan, who had been completely engrossed in the story, looked at Jack with admiration. "You know a lot about dinosaurs, Jack." Jack chuckled softly. "Well, I had to learn quickly. I wanted to have something cool to talk to you about." A moment of silence followed. Then Ethan asked a question that caught both Jack and Sarah off guard. "Jack, why weren't you around before, when I was younger?" Jack felt his heart clench. He looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Ethan," Jack began, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes adults make mistakes, big ones. I made a huge mistake by not being here for you and your mom. But I want you to know that from the moment I found out about you, not a day went by that I didn't think about you or wish I could be here." Ethan processed this for a moment. "Are you going to leave again?" The simple question was heavy with emotion. Jack felt tears prick at his eyes. "No, Ethan," he answered firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Sarah, who had approached quietly, placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Your dad means it, sweetheart. He's here to stay." It was the first time Sarah had referred to Jack as Ethan's dad in front of the boy. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by any of them. In the days that followed, Jack and Ethan's bond continued to grow. Jack brought board games for them to play together, told funny stories from his childhood, and even got permission to bring in a laptop so they could watch dinosaur documentaries. Sarah, meanwhile, watched with a mixture of joy and caution. She couldn't deny how happy Ethan seemed with Jack around. But years of raising Ethan alone had left scars that wouldn't disappear overnight. One evening, after Ethan had drifted off to sleep, Sarah pulled Jack into the hallway for a talk. "Jack," she began, her voice low but intense, "I need to know. Are you sure about this? About being a father? Because Ethan is getting attached to you, and I can't bear the thought of him being hurt again." Jack took Sarah's hands in his eyes filled with determination. "Sarah, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know I messed up in the past, badly, but I'm here now and I plan to stay. You and Ethan, and you're my family. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to both of you." Tears that Sarah had been holding back for so long finally spilled over. "I want to believe you, Jack, but I'm so scared." Jack pulled her into a gentle hug. "I know, and I understand. But I promise you, Sarah, I'm going to spend every day showing you and Ethan that I'm here for good." When they returned to Ethan's room, they found him awake, gazing at them curiously. "Is everything okay?" he asked, groggy with sleep. Sarah approached the bed, stroking Ethan's hair. "Everything's fine, my love. Your dad and I were just talking about how much we love you." Ethan smiled sleepily, his eyes drifting shut again. "I love you guys too," he mumbled before drifting off. Jack and Sarah exchanged a tearful look. Those simple words, spoken with such innocence and sincerity, meant more than either of them could express. In the days that followed, the dynamic between the three continued to evolve. Ethan occasionally called Jack Dad, always tentatively, as if testing how the word felt. Each time, Jack's face lit up with pure joy. Sarah, for her part, began to relax more in Jack's presence. She found herself laughing at his jokes, sharing stories of Ethan's childhood, and sometimes simply enjoying the quiet comfort of having someone to share parental responsibilities with. One day, as she watched Jack and Ethan work on a puzzle together, laughing and teasing each other, Sarah realized that something inside her had changed. The fear and distrust that had been her constant companions for so long were giving way to something new, hope. She knew there was still a long road ahead. Ethan's physical and emotional recovery would take time. Building trust and strengthening family bonds would be an ongoing process. But looking at the man she had once loved and the child they shared, Sarah felt for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, they could have the happy ending she'd always dreamed of. The ties were being rebuilt, slowly but surely. And with each small moment of connection, each shared smile and each promise fulfilled, the family they were forming grew stronger and more real. The day of Ethan's discharge finally arrived, bringing with it a flurry of emotions for everyone involved. The hospital room that had been their home for the past few weeks was now filled with colourful balloons and get-well cards from the nurses who had grown fond of the little patient. "Ready to go home, champ?" Jack asked, helping Ethan into a clean t-shirt. Ethan nodded enthusiastically, his eyes shining. "I can't wait to see my toys again." Sarah, who was packing the last of their belongings into a small suitcase, exchanged a meaningful look with Jack. They still hadn't told Ethan about the move. "Actually, sweetheart," Sarah began gently, sitting on the edge of the bed, "we have a surprise for you." Ethan glanced curiously from his mother to Jack. "What kind of surprise?" Jack knelt down beside Ethan, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Well, while you were in the hospital, I got to thinking, now that we're a family, maybe it'd be cool if we had a new house, a place big enough for all of us." Ethan's eyes widened. "A new house? But what about all my toys?" Sarah quickly chimed in. "Don't worry, sweetheart. All your toys have already been moved to the new place. In fact, you're going to have an even bigger room for them." Ethan seemed to mull this over for a moment before a grin spread across his face. "Can I have a dinosaur bed?" Jack laughed, relieved by Ethan's positive reaction. "You sure can. In fact, there's already one waiting for you." The drive to their new home was filled with anticipation. Ethan, buckled into the back seat surrounded by pillows, Sarah's insistence, fired off questions about the house. "Does it have a yard? Can I get a dog? Is my room painted blue?" Jack and Sarah answered patiently, sharing occasional smiles in the rearview mirror. It was the first time they truly felt like a united family. When they finally arrived, Ethan's jaw dropped. The house was a beautiful 2-story with a large front lawn. Jack had made sure it was in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for kids. "Wow," Ethan breathed as Jack helped him out of the car. "It's huge." Sarah laughed softly. "Wait until you see the inside, honey." Jack opened the front door with dramatic flair. "Welcome to our new home." The interior was spacious and inviting. Jack had hired a decorator to make sure everything was ready, but he'd also ensured personal touches were present. Photos of Ethan and Sarah dotted the walls, along with some new ones of the three of them together at the hospital. "Come on, Ethan," Jack said, taking the boy's hand. "Let me show you your room." They climbed the stairs, Sarah following close behind. When they opened the door to Ethan's room, the boy let out a gleeful shout. The room was a dinosaur paradise. The walls were painted with a prehistoric jungle scene, and in the center was a bed shaped like a T-Rex. Shelves filled with dinosaur books and toys lined an entire wall. It's amazing," Ethan exclaimed, rushing to examine every detail. Sarah turned to Jack, tears in her eyes. "Jack, you didn't have to do all this." Jack smiled, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I wanted to. You two deserve the best." The following days were a flurry of unpacking, exploring, and settling in. Ethan spent hours in his new room, rearranging his toys and creating new dinosaur adventures. Sarah busied herself organizing the kitchen and living area, determined to make the house feel like a true home. Jack, eager to help but unsure of his place, flitted between them, offering assistance where he could. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Jack found Sarah in the kitchen staring pensively out the window. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. Sarah turned and a small smile on her lips. "Yeah, just thinking. It's strange, after so many years of it just being Ethan and me, all of a sudden we're a family of 3. Jack nodded, understanding. "I know it's a big change. If it's too much or too fast—" "No," Sarah interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. "It's not that. I'm just adjusting. But it's good, Jack. Seeing Ethan so happy, having you here, it's more than I ever thought we'd have." Jack felt his heart fill with emotion. "I promise you, Sarah, I'll do everything I can to earn this second chance." In the days that followed, the family began to form new routines and make new memories together. Mornings were spent sharing breakfast, with Jack making dinosaur-shaped pancakes to Ethan's delight. Afternoons were spent in the yard, where Jack taught Ethan how to throw a ball, or they worked together to plant a small garden. Evenings became everyone's favorite time. After dinner, they gathered in the living room to read stories or watch movies. Inevitably, Ethan would fall asleep curled between his parents, one arm around each of them. That didn't mean everything was perfect. There were tense moments, especially when Ethan had nightmares about the accident, or when random memories of his previous life resurfaced unexpectedly. One night, Ethan woke up screaming, tears streaming down his face. Jack and Sarah rushed into his room to find him huddled on the bed. "Ethan, it's okay," Sarah soothed, pulling him into her arms. "It was just a bad dream." Jack sat on the edge of the bed, gently rubbing Ethan's back. "Do you want to tell us about it, champ?" Ethan sobbed into Sarah's chest. I remembered the accident. There were bright lights and a loud noise, and then everything went dark." Jack felt a surge of guilt wash over him. He shared a pained look with Sarah before speaking. "Ethan, I'm so sorry you went through that, but I want you to know you're safe now. Your mom and I are here, and nothing bad is going to happen to you." Ethan slowly lifted his head, looking at Jack with tearful eyes. "Promise?" "Promise," Jack said firmly, hooking his pinky finger with Ethan's. "Pinky swear." Ethan linked his pinky with Jack's, a small smile forming. "Okay." Sarah watched the exchange with her heart overflowing. It was moments like this that reminded her just how far they had come as a family. As days turned into weeks, their new reality solidified. Ethan, although he still had moments of confusion or sadness, seemed to thrive in his new environment. He talked excitedly about having 2 parents to his new neighborhood friends, and insisted on sitting between Jack and Sarah whenever possible. One Saturday afternoon, while Jack and Ethan were building a dinosaur fortress in the backyard, Sarah watched from the porch. Jack glanced up, catching her eye, and grinned. "Hey, you two," Sarah called. "How about a picnic for lunch?" "Yes," Ethan shouted excitedly. "Can we eat inside the fortress?" Jack laughed, ruffling Ethan's hair. "Sure thing, champ. Let's go help your mom get everything ready." As they worked together in the kitchen, preparing sandwiches and cutting fruit, Sarah felt a rush of gratitude wash over her. This wasn't the life she had imagined all those years ago when she found out she was pregnant and alone. It was better. It was a second chance, not just for Jack, but for all of them. Later, sitting in their makeshift fortress, laughing and sharing stories, Sarah looked at her small family and knew they were exactly where they belonged. This new house wasn't just a place to live. It was the start of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, forgiveness, and limitless possibilities. The smell of freshly made pancakes filled the kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the windows. Jack Yass, wearing an apron decorated with dinosaur prints, a gift from Ethan, hummed softly while flipping another pancake on the griddle. "Dad?" Ethan's excited voice echoed through the house. "Are they ready yet?" Jack smiled, still surprised by how effortlessly Ethan now called him Dad. "Almost done, champ. Why don't you help your mom set the table?" Sarah entered the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, smiling as she took in the domestic scene. 6 months had passed since they'd moved into this house, and sometimes she still marveled at how natural everything felt. "Good morning, you two," she said, planting a quick kiss on Jack's cheek before turning to help Ethan with the plates. As they settled down for breakfast, Jack couldn't help but notice how excited Ethan looked. "Someone's in a good mood today," he remarked, serving a generous helping of pancakes onto Ethan's plate. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "That's because today's a special day." Sarah raised an eyebrow, exchanging a playful look with Jack. "Oh, and why is that?" "Because," Ethan said, pausing dramatically, "it's exactly 6 months since we moved here. 6 months since we became a real family." The silence that followed was loaded with emotion. Jack felt a lump form in his throat, while Sarah blinked rapidly to hold back tears. "You're right, sweetheart," Sarah finally managed. "It is a very special day." Jack reached over and gently squeezed Ethan's hand. "You know, champ, these have been the best 6 months of my life." Ethan beamed, his eyes shining. "Mine too, Dad." "Hi, Sam, I really like having you here." "Oh, really?" Jack teased lightly. "You only like it." Ethan giggled. Okay. I love having you here. I love our family." Sarah watched them, her heart brimming with happiness. Moments like this made all the struggles and fears worthwhile. After breakfast, while Ethan played in the backyard, Jack and Sarah sat on the porch, cups of coffee in hand. "Can you believe it?" Sarah asked softly. 6 months. Jack shook his head in awe. "Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday that we were in that hospital room, unsure of everything, and other times it feels like it's always been this way," Sarah finished. They fell into a companionable silence. Watching Ethan chase soap bubbles, he blew himself. "Sarah," Jack began, his voice serious, "I want you to know how grateful I am for this second chance, for letting me be part of your lives." Sarah turned to him, her eyes soft. "Jack, you've shown us day after day that you deserve to be here. Seeing you with Ethan, the love and dedication you show, it's everything I ever wanted for him." Jack smiled, taking her hand. "And for you, is it what you wanted?" A slight blush colored Sarah's cheeks. Yes. It's more than I ever imagined we could have." Just then, Ethan came running up, panting and smiling. "Mom, Dad, come play with me." Jack stood, offering his hand to Sarah. "What do you say, ready for a bubble war?" Sarah laughed, taking his hand. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Hartley." The following weeks flew by in a blur of family activities, work responsibilities, and preparations for a special event. Ethan's birthday. On the morning of the big day, Ethan woke up to find the house decorated with balloons, streamers, and of course, dinosaurs everywhere. "Happy birthday, my love," Sarah exclaimed, hugging him tight. Jack appeared, carrying a huge T-Rex-shaped cake. "Happy birthday, champ. Ready for your party?" Ethan bounced with excitement. "I can't wait." "All my friends are coming, right?" Sarah nodded, smiling. "Every single one, and we have a few special surprises in store." The party was a roaring success. The backyard filled with children laughing, playing in a volcano-shaped ball pit, and taking part in a fossil hunt Jack had organized. When the time came to sing Happy Birthday, with Ethan beaming over his dinosaur cake, Jack and Sarah exchanged a proud, emotional look. This wasn't just Ethan's birthday. It was a celebration of their journey as a family. After the last guest left, and Ethan finally fell asleep, exhausted but happy, Jack and Sarah found themselves on the porch once more. "That was quite a day," Jack commented, sliding an arm around Sarah's shoulders. She leaned into him, letting out a contented sigh. "It was perfect, seeing Ethan so happy." "I know," Jack agreed. "It's all I've ever wanted for him. For us." Sarah looked up, meeting Jack's eyes. "You know, a year ago, if someone had told me we'd be here like this, I never would have believed it." Jack smiled gently. "And now?" "Now," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "I can't imagine our life any other way." At that moment, they heard soft footsteps behind them. Ethan stood there, rubbing his tired eyes. "Hey, birthday boy," Jack said softly. "Couldn't sleep." Ethan shook his head, nestling between his parents. "Just wanted to be with you guys a little longer." Sarah and Jack exchanged a glance over Ethan's head. their hearts overflowing with love. "How about we watch the stars together?" Jack suggested. The three of them lay on the grass, Ethan sandwiched between Jack and Sarah, their hands linked. As they pointed out constellations and made wishes on shooting stars, each felt a deep certainty that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. This was more than a new beginning. It was the promise of a life filled with love, laughter, and cherished memories. A family, united not just by blood, but by choice and unconditional devotion. As the night wore on, Ethan dozed off in his parents' arms. Jack and Sarah exchanged a final look, filled with silent promises and hopes for the future. They had come a long way, overcoming hurdles that once seemed insurmountable, but here they were, stronger, closer than ever. The future shone bright, full of possibility, and they couldn't wait to see what the next chapter of their lives would bring.